ago. And in the last hour, his new Chancellor, Nadhim Zahawi, who was also appointed in the last couple of days, called on him to go. This is a fast developing story for people who are just joining us. We are breaking into programmes to bring you the news from Downing Street this morning that Boris Johnson will resign today. In the last few minutes, a Number 10 spokesperson has confirmed the Prime Minister will make a statement to the country today. I'm joined this morning by our political reporter, Shihab Khan. What a morning it's been so far. It's not even 9:30. Please bring us up to speed with everything we know that has happened in the last 15 minutes alone.
Yeah, so we've had a statement from Number 10 to say that Boris Johnson will be delivering a statement later. We understand that it's going to be a resignation. We expect it to be around lunchtime, but there's a real sense of inevitability about this. You've gone through the numbers, and it sounds like there have been more than 50 resignations from those who are on the government payroll in the last few days. His Chancellor has gone, his Health Secretary has gone. The man he appointed to replace the Chancellor this morning has been telling him that he needs to go. There have been conversations going on for days. It looked like Boris Johnson would try and cling on for a little while longer, but the pressure has been too much simply because he cannot fulfill those roles. He cannot hire anyone to come in and replace the people that have stepped down because there has been disarray in the party for the last few days, as almost everyone has been calling for him to step down.
Yeah, you say a sense of inevitability, and I was here yesterday lunchtime and it felt like that was there then, and then of course we all went to bed and nothing had changed. So do you think it was that real kind of flood of resignations this morning? I think there was 4 in about 4 minutes at one point.
It's difficult to tell at this point what exactly the final straw was. We know that the Prime Minister went and spoke to Sir Graham Brady this morning. He's the chair of the 1922 committee. That's the committee that represents Conservative backbenchers, where he told him he finally understood what the feeling within the party was and it was time for him to go. There have been so many resignations. Yesterday he sacked Michael Gove in what appeared to be a final power play to try and get some authority back within those cabinet ministers. It's the fact that all the people around him, the senior cabinet ministers, those who have been his allies for a number of years, people like Priti Patel, people like Grant Shapps, the people who have been by his side advising him for so long, telling him it's now time to step away, was probably the final moment. Nadhim Zahawi this morning, that's a big thing. He was appointed Chancellor 36 hours ago and he's saying it's time for you to go. The writing's been on the wall for a couple of days.
Yeah, I mean, if we just take a step back for a moment and if we talk about the fact that this new Chancellor was appointed a heartbeat ago, and the Education Secretary, and in the last half an hour, the two of them in these vitally important jobs, we're talking about a cost of living crisis that everyone watching this programme is facing. Anyone who's got a child in school is really keen to see who the new Education Secretary is, given what the children have been through in the pandemic. You've had the Education Secretary resign, and you've had Nadhim Zahawi being in the room in part, as part of that cabinet revolt, and then this morning putting on paper so everyone can see his reasons for calling Boris Johnson to go. And we may never find out what the final straw was, but these, just taking a step back, are remarkable moments in British politics.
No, absolutely. When we had the Health Secretary and the Chancellor resign initially, it looked as though the Prime Minister would just try and carry on, replace those roles and keep going. And it's the flurry of resignations that have followed which have made it clear that it's not just two people, it's not just Rishi Sunak and Sajid Javid who aren't happy about this, but it's the entire cabinet, it's most of those on the government payroll. As you say, we're going through a cost of living crisis. Those two roles are incredibly important. He replaced them quickly, and the fact that within 36 hours, both of those people are saying you need to go, one of whom, the Education Secretary, has stepped down, indicates the lack of authority the Prime Minister's got. What happens from now is going to be the big question. Is he going to stay on and sort of be an interim Prime Minister for a brief period while the party elects the new leader? What's going to happen from now onwards? Because there are a number of gaps and vacancies in the cabinet still. He hasn't appointed a new Northern Ireland Secretary. Brandon Lewis resigned this morning. He hasn't replaced Michael Gove at Levelling Up and Housing. Those are still decisions that need to be made. The ultimate reality is we've not had a functioning government for a few days. The departments have been saying we don't have ministers, we don't have junior ministers, we're not able to do our work, and that's the key thing here. The Prime Minister was told yesterday, you simply cannot run the government as it is because we do not have the people to make it work. And when the Prime Minister gets told that, it's very difficult to carry on.
Let's hope today, when that moment comes, is the beginning of the start of that changing and getting back to a functioning government, because that's obviously what everybody wants and needs. Well, let's give you more now in detail about that key intervention we were talking about from the new Chancellor this morning, Nadhim Zahawi, who wrote a letter to Mr. Johnson telling him to go. And in an accompanying tweet, he said, "Prime Minister, this is not sustainable and it will only get worse. For you, the Conservative Party, and most importantly, all of the country, you must do the right thing and go now." Well, we can join our political correspondent Daniel Hewitt as well. He is in the Houses of Parliament this morning. There's a pretty frenzied atmosphere here in Downing Street this morning. How is it with you, and what's the latest you are hearing there?
That's right, Nina. A few minutes ago, the House of Commons procession came through Central Lobby to start proceedings for the day. Part of the problem for Boris Johnson has been he has so few ministers to actually take part in the debate in the House of Commons, and that's probably part of the reason why he's had to go. What we're hearing from a number 10 source is that Boris Johnson this morning spoke to Sir Graham Brady, the chair of the 1922 committee. You remember that yesterday the 22 committee met to discuss potentially changing party rules to allow a new confidence vote to take place sooner rather than later. That confidence vote that he survived last month meant that he's safe for a year under current party rules. The 22 committee was effectively threatening to change those rules next week. Now, this morning, Graham Brady spoke with the Prime Minister on the phone, and they effectively agreed a timetable, we understand from one number 10 source, that he will remain as Prime Minister, until a party conference in the autumn, and then a new leader will be announced. So he will continue as Prime Minister, but he will effectively stand down as Conservative Party leader. We're told by one source that Boris Johnson had reflected overnight and woke, I quote, with a clarity of thought and decided to resign. We also understand from one number 10 source that Boris Johnson will be speaking to the Ukrainian President Zelensky, to reassure him as well. It's quite important here to make the point. I know Shihab was talking about what we're not sure what happens now. To be clear, Boris Johnson will stay on as Prime Minister in Downing Street until a new Conservative Party leader is elected and announced. That process will take 2 or 3 months. That process will begin, I think, pretty quickly. But we expect to hear from Boris Johnson at some point today. But he will remain as Prime Minister, but not as Conservative Party leader.
OK, Daniel, so in the end, it sounds like, as has been predicted, it was always going to come down to the numbers. So when we're talking about this extremely powerful group of Tory MPs, the 1922 committee, when they had that feeling, that sense, that reality that there was less support for Boris Johnson in terms of the loyalists turning into rebels in this situation, that was effectively the final straw for the Prime Minister, a Prime Minister who it's often been talked about would be dragged out of Downing Street kicking and screaming, but when he hasn't got that vital support of those backbenchers, well, the game is over.
Yeah, politics always in the end comes down to numbers. And in that confidence vote last month, 41% of the Conservative Party voted against Boris Johnson. That allowed him to effectively carry on. The problem in the last few days has been clearly that number has gone up and up and up, and has quite clearly exceeded 50%. So any other new confidence vote that would take place, and let's be clear, the 1922 Executive Committee, which elects a new committee next week, was going to look at these rules again, and everything we're hearing says they would have changed the rules next week if Boris Johnson had carried on staying in number 10, insisting he was staying. And if a new vote had taken place, Boris Johnson would have lost. What they were effectively saying yesterday by delaying that change in the rules till next week was they're effectively giving Boris Johnson the chance for a dignified exit. By holding that over him, they were saying, look, we're going to have to change the rules here and hold this vote, but you will lose this vote. So the mere fact of knowing that means you should now go. And it looked like last night that Boris Johnson was going to stick in. And we were hearing from number 10 that they were going to make new announcements to replace those cabinet positions that had been lost, those ministerial positions, those PPS, those junior minister positions. Clearly they've rang around a few MPs, and they simply can't fill those posts, which tells you everything you need to know about what would happen in any confidence vote. The numbers of people supporting him have simply ebbed away. And in the end, Boris Johnson has seen the writing on the wall this morning. Many would say, how did he not see the writing on the wall yesterday? Why did Downing Street spend an entire 24 hours after Rishi Sunak resigned, Sajid Javid resigned, and others, insisting they would dig in when it was clear they were going to be unable to do that? But right now, you're right, Nina, the numbers simply do not stack up for Boris Johnson, and he has made this decision.
And Daniel, on a very, very practical level, because we're talking about everything in all of our lives that really matter right now in terms of the reason why we need a government that is fully functioning, and we've got these key positions that are unfilled at the moment, the latest one obviously being the Education Secretary. If Boris Johnson is resigning as the Tory leader but staying for the time being in his role as Prime Minister, what happens to the top team, to the cabinet? How does that function in the weeks ahead?
Well, I think a couple of things to say on this. I think it's quite interesting that we saw this morning Nadhim Zahawi write a note to Boris Johnson on Treasury-headed notepaper, even though he's only been Chancellor for 36 hours, saying that he should go, but he didn't resign. Ben Wallace, the same, maybe privately having conversations with Boris Johnson, but wasn't resigning. So some key cabinet posts decided that the best thing to do was to urge Boris Johnson to go, but actually stay in post. You're right, though, there are lots of posts to fill. A number 10 source has told us that they hope to refill those ministerial positions. So I think what we'll see over the next few days is an attempt to try and refill those posts that have been lost. There is, though, a question here, and I think this will now start, the conversation will be happening around this place amongst Tory MPs to whether they accept this agreement that appears to have happened between Sir Graham Brady and Boris Johnson, whether they agree to this timetable that Boris Johnson can stay on in number 10 for 2 or 3 more months. I suspect you're going to hear a lot of Tory MPs question that timetable and say he has to go, that his behaviour in the last 24 to 48 hours, never mind the stuff that's happened before, means he simply can't carry on as Prime Minister. I think you will see in the next few hours Tory MPs challenging the idea that Boris Johnson can stay on as a caretaker Prime Minister. We know that Dominic Raab has stepped in for Boris Johnson before when he has been incapacitated. I think you'll hear questions and pleas from some Tory MPs to have some kind of caretaker take over from Boris Johnson. I think you will hear calls for people to say Boris Johnson simply cannot stay on as Prime Minister. But to answer your question, number 10, I think, from one source tells us, hope to refill those positions. Practically, Nina, they have to try and fill them. Because they say right now, in the House of Commons, it's media questions. Nadine Dorries is taking questions from Labour and MPs in media questions, literally down this corridor down here. For some departments, they simply don't have the ministers to do that. In education, they simply don't have anyone to take questions. The country can't run like that. So in practical terms, yes, they have to fill those positions very quickly. There is a big question, though, Nina, over whether it's Boris Johnson who will be afforded the right to refill those positions.
Insight there, and just insight into quite how powerful that one man Sir Graham Brady is right now in terms of British politics and the future, at least for the next few weeks, and we will see what happens in terms of what the Tory party, how they react to this thought of a caretaker Prime Minister when we're talking about a Prime Minister who is presumably resigning because of what people perceive to be his behaviour, his personality, as opposed to the policies that he has presented to the country during his reign as Prime Minister and Tory leader. Look, just to recap, if you're just joining us this morning on ITV, we have broken into programmes to bring you the news that in the last half an hour, a number 10 spokesperson has confirmed that the Prime Minister will make a statement to the country today. He is expected to resign. We're now hearing that he's expected to resign at lunchtime. His authority has been draining away following dozens of ministerial resignations. This morning alone, 11 ministers have now quit. That brings the total to 57. Goodness, that total is changing all the time while we are on air. That includes his Education Secretary, Michelle Donnellan, who was only appointed 2 days ago. There was also a key intervention from the new Chancellor this morning, Nadhim Zahawi, wrote a letter to Mr. Johnson telling him to go. And in a tweet he said, Prime Minister, this is not sustainable and it will only get worse for you, for the Conservative Party, and most importantly for all the country. You must do the right thing and go now. Let's get the latest then from our political reporter, Shihab Khan. That key statement from Nadhim Zahawi. We're looking at a person who has been told, Boris Johnson has been told, not just in the last 24 hours, but quite a few weeks and months as well, that for the good of the country, those who are thinking that he should be out of number 10, this is the best thing for you to do to quit. But he didn't listen, but he has listened now. So we will analyse over the months and years ahead what was the key moment that persuaded him to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we've been saying, this is all about functionality. This is about whether or not the government can do those important jobs that it needs to do right now. We've spoken about the cost of living crisis already on the programme. We've spoken about education. There's a whole host of issues that the government needs to deal with. And they've been in a position in the last few days in particular, with ministers resigning, senior figures within the cabinet resigning, where the Prime Minister's not been able to do that. Those big issues can't be dealt with. We had an interview with Nadhim Zahawi yesterday morning when he came in as the new Chancellor, and he was speaking about his vision for the country. He wants to do this, he wants to cut taxes, he wants to deal with this cost of living crisis, but he can't do that. He cannot physically do that when there are people not willing to sit around the table and have those discussions with the Prime Minister, go through those big policy decisions. And the Prime Minister was told that yesterday. He was told that all these vacancies that you've got, you're not going to be able to get people in to do them because you don't have the support to do that. But what is the moment that's sort of been the final straw? We're not entirely sure. It could be the fact that the Chancellor, the person he appointed 36 hours ago, said you have to go. It could be the fact that yesterday there's been so many resignations. The numbers are almost unprecedented. We've not seen a Prime Minister lose so many people in such a short space of time. But yesterday, number 10 were telling us that he was buoyant, he was defiant, that he was going to carry on.
We saw that in the Prime Minister's questions as well. We saw that coming across.
Absolutely. It was at the start of Prime Minister's questions, he laughed. There was a bit of a jovial spirit about Boris Johnson, something we've got used to over the years, of him almost laughing about the situation. He said, I've had ministerial meetings and I'm expecting to have more, and he wanted to carry on. And the position from number 10 last night, this is only a few hours ago, was there are going to be more appointments, he's going to keep going, he's not going to give up. But it's the pressure that's come from his cabinet and also the pressure that's come from the Conservative backbenchers, the ones who have said, we will change the rules. If we get to Monday, if we get to Tuesday, we will change the rules, and there's going to be an election to decide whether or not that can happen, and then there'll be a vote of no confidence. Now, he may have won one last month, but the writing on the wall over the last few weeks suggests that he wouldn't be able to win another one if it were to happen.
Yeah, what a difference a few weeks makes, for sure. Let's now join our royal editor, Chris Shipp, who is at Windsor for us this morning. Chris, Boris Johnson must, as we know, go to see the Queen after he resigns. Just remind us, how does that all work?
Well, Nina, Boris Johnson needs to see the Queen if he is going to seek to dissolve Parliament. That was clearly something that some people thought he might do yesterday if he were going to call an election to re-seek a mandate from the British people. But we don't think he'll have to see the Queen face to face if he is simply resigning. That will only happen at the moment of handover from one Prime Minister to the next. The Queen remains here, and as you know, the Queen must always have a Prime Minister. She must always have a functioning government. It is, after all, Her Majesty's government. We know that she spoke to Boris Johnson last night by telephone from here in their usual weekly audience. Heaven knows what they spoke about. No one ever knows the private conversations between the Queen and her Prime Minister. But clearly she will be concerned that this country has a functioning government. At the moment, as we've been discussing, there are plenty of vacancies in ministerial departments, 50-odd vacancies, but those key officers of state still have cabinet ministers, and I think that will, for the Queen, at least be some reassurance that she has a functioning government. We are waiting to find out from the palace whether or not a conversation has taken place this morning between the Queen and the Prime Minister since his decision to resign. We have yet to hear back from them on that.
Okay, get back to me as soon as you hear about that, Chris Shipp. For now, thank you very much, Chris Shipp, our royal editor in Windsor. We can join now our political editor, Robert Peston, who's on the line for us. Robert, after all the scandals, the fines, the accusations, the allegations, the promotions, the resignations, today is the day.
Today is the day, as you say. We will get a statement. We already know, obviously, that he's resigning. But in the middle of the day, we will see the Prime Minister in time-honoured fashion come out of the door of number 10, go up to that special lectern, which has the crest on it that we've got so used to seeing over the last few years. A number of prime ministers over just the last few years, Theresa May, David Cameron, have stood at that lectern and made resignation statements. We'll see that around lunchtime. But, and I should stress this, there are still some very important decisions that have to be taken about the process for choosing a new leader, and I'm going to give you some detail about that in just a moment. But also, there are still huge uncertainties about how the government will function with Boris Johnson as caretaker. Now, as I understand it, Boris Johnson is planning to stay on until a new leader is chosen by the Tory party, and actually that could take months, and I'll explain to you why it could take months in just a moment. But that then begs the question, all those ministers who over the last 24 hours have said they couldn't work for Boris Johnson and have resigned, are they expected to simply come back and work for him as caretaker Prime Minister? We simply don't know. And you know, for the opposition, this is sort of gold, as it were, that you've got a Prime Minister who his colleagues have lost confidence in. He's staying on. Education Secretary this morning in this extraordinary intervention. She was only appointed 24 hours ago. Says she can't possibly work for him. Is she now going to go back and decide that just because he's there for he's there with a sort of time limit on it for a few months, that it's okay to work for him? So there are all sorts of really important issues still to be resolved. Now let's go back to this other thing, which is obviously on most people's minds, which is how will the new leader be chosen? Now that process is decided by two institutions. One is the executive committee of the 1922 committee, which is this sort of organisation of backbench MPs. Now, a new executive committee will be elected on Monday, and that committee will decide whether there will be an immediate leadership election, and that's just the first stage of this leadership election, and that would mean, if it were immediate, that we would then have 2 weeks of candidates putting themselves forward to Tory MPs, and then there'd be a series of contests.
I'm just going to interrupt you there. I do apologise. Yeah. We've just had some breaking news in just from the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer. I just want to bring our viewers that, if you will. So the Labour leader has reacted to the news that Boris Johnson is going to resign as party leader. Sir Keir Starmer said it was good news that Boris Johnson is resigning, but we don't need to change the Tory at the top. We need a proper change of government. Let's return to Shihab there. So clearly, Sir Keir Starmer, he's not bothered about who replaces Boris Johnson. He wants an election.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, his ultimate objective here is to become Prime Minister, and that's not going to happen if the Conservative Party just change their leader. He will want an election. But what is likely to happen now is that the Prime Minister does carry on for a little while the Conservative Party elects their new leader. And there's already been plenty of people that are putting their names forward, both publicly and behind the scenes, and that work will now almost immediately start. We heard from Suella Braverman yesterday, who said that she wants to run to be the party leader. Steve Baker this morning was suggesting that he might do the same. There are plenty of people that want to do it, but this is a huge moment of history. The Prime Minister will be out here in a matter of hours, where he'll be explaining exactly why he's stepping down, what his plans are, what the timetable is, what he'll be doing in those months, whether or not he'll be replacing those cabinet ministers with who. Will those people who step down be coming back to do the jobs that they've walked away from even this morning? It's a very, very interesting time in British politics, and we'll have to wait and see what the next few hours say for us to really understand how this is going to work.
Yeah, I think really it sounds like everything has changed this morning, but the chaos and the uncertainty is still continuing, with all those big question marks that both you and Robert was talking about. Well, for now, that is all from us from Downing Street, where the Prime Minister is expected to resign this lunchtime. It follows more than 50 ministerial resignations over the last couple of days. We're expecting a statement here at around 12:30. We will be back, of course, to bring you that statement live. This morning is coming up in a moment. But for now, from all of us